Hello everyone, Republic Jim here. I'm just finishing up a nice overnight camp out in the snow and finished having breakfast, just having my last cup of coffee and watching the fire die down, and finally have a chance to talk about what I see happening in 2024. I know it's close to a month late due to several factors. One, I wanted to think it over and decide exactly, excuse me, decide exactly what I wanted to say. And so I was kind of stalling on that. And then we had different weather that hit that really put a damper in filming. And, one thing led to another and it just kept dragging on. But here I am. And as you can probably tell from the thumbnail, I'm not very optimistic about this year. Anybody that thinks that things are going to improve after the last 3 years is likely to be disappointed. But I'm going to kind of break it down over what I'm sure is going to happen, and then things that I think are possible, and and then a slight possibility. Um, I do have notes just so I don't forget anything on this. And I'm going to try to go through it fairly quickly. I don't want to be too doom and gloom, and this could get pretty dark. But anyway, I'm going to do my best to hit it quickly. Okay, so first off, for the entire Northwest, I'm expecting a bad fire season, partly due to the weather, and partly because more and more over the last few years we've seen cases of people from urban areas going to rural areas and deliberately setting fires. And I think that's a horrible trend that's likely to continue, and it's just going to create a really bad fire season this year. So I'm going to be planning accordingly for that. Um, More solar flares. The sun is coming out of its kind of dormant cycle and becoming more active again. We're going to see a lot more sunspots and solar flares and coronal mass ejections and such. And because I happen to believe that that's linked, the solar activity is linked to the core of the Earth, or, the core of the Earth actually reacts to solar activity. I mean, the sun is what drives it all. But because of that, I also expect to see more volcanic activity and large earthquakes. And I mean, right off the bat, on New Year's Day, we saw the big earthquake in Japan, and I fully expect to see several more quakes of that magnitude or possibly larger during the course of the year. And, we have the one volcano going off in Iceland. I'm expecting Kilauea to become very active again sometime this year, and there could be others. All right, moving on. More frequent power outages or rolling blackouts, partly because our infrastructure is just aging and we're having more problems, partly because when there's fire danger, utilities want to minimize their liability, so they're shutting off power just so lines won't blow down and spark fires and such. So right when we need power, then it's getting cut. And I mean, it hasn't happened in this area, but there's other areas like California that see that frequently. And I think the rolling blackouts will happen more often just because the grid is getting overloaded. They're wanting everybody to switch to electric and, get EVs and all this, but there just isn't the infrastructure to support the demand. And especially during really cold spells or really hot spells, when there's a lot more heating or cooling demand, it's going to just cause things to overload, and we're going to see a lot more of those blackouts. And especially as they shut down coal plants and take out dams and reduce the capacity of our system, solar and wind is not going to make up the difference. So we will see shortages, and it's going to become more frequent. I think inflation is going to continue to run amok. I know the so-called experts, the feds and everybody think they have it under control and the economy's heading for this soft rebound. I tend to disagree. And, this is just my opinion. I'm certainly no expert, but last year and the year before, I called it a lot better than what the experts did, when they said that inflation was transitory, and I said to expect it to keep going up. I think that it's kind of slowed down for now, mainly because gas prices are down, but that is going to turn around, especially with all the chaos in the Red Sea. And I see gas prices starting to come back strong and go up again. So, if you have gas cans and store that, I recommend taking advantage of it while it's down a bit. Put some stabilizer in it and store it and be ready for that, because I think that's going to go back up quickly again relatively soon, and then that will drive cost increases and everything else, along with the fact that shipping right now is really running into problems. So I just don't see that this short drop in inflation is going to continue. I think it's going to just take off, and cost of living is going to continue to go up, and our actual buying power and standard of living will go down. I expect to see more high-profile bank and commercial realty failures. Might only be one or two, but sometime this year, expect to see some other major implosion. There's just too many financial institutions and commercial realty that have way too much outstanding debt compared to their assets, and with property values dropping out on commercial real estate, that's going to really screw things up. So I anticipate that will be a problem more and more. More layoffs and unemployment, and also automation, which is all kind of tied together. Minimum wages keep going up all over the place, and just driving labor costs to where it's not cost effective to do many of these jobs. So they're going to be cutting positions, and there's a lot of those minimum wage jobs that can be automated or done in other ways. And so in general, the cost of living will be rising faster than wages, even when they do raise those minimum wages, because that just drives the costs up for all the other consumers who don't necessarily get a big pay increase in relation to the minimum wage. Supply chain delays and shortages. I've talked a little before about the problems in the Panama Canal because of drought. It's cutting how much shipping can go through there. Now we have a lot less traffic through the Suez Canal because of the terror attacks in the Red Sea. And there's just other issues with shipping, and so it's going to cause more delays, and will, of course, cause shortages when there's too much demand and can't get those products in a timely manner. So some of what we saw during the lockdown will probably come back this year. That's what I'm expecting. Also, more crime, especially in major cities. It's just going to continue this downward spiral where police are getting prevented from doing their job. DAs aren't prosecuting stuff. Criminals are getting let out on the street, and there's no consequences. Just a lot of the homeless people are getting more violent, and there's people roaming around with mental problems. So, like I said, especially in the cities, expect to see a lot more of that. It's just going to continue to get worse. Then more protests and riots, especially as we get closer to the election. Some of it will be political, some of it will be about other things, but in general, I just see that happening more and more, all sorts of disruptions. The climate activists are just being emboldened to go and shut down freeways and all this thing, and people are getting more and more frustrated with that, so it's going to come to a head more this year, and I expect to see, like I said, more rioting, and especially depending on how things play out in the primaries and then getting closer to the general election, could be more political infighting there. So it's going to be chaotic this year for that. And then the final thing that I'm quite certain we'll see is an increase in severe sickness, whether it's from flu or other illnesses. There's just a huge number of people that have weakened immune systems now from things that have happened over the past couple of years. And so sicknesses that in the past wouldn't have been nearly as severe to the majority of healthy people are going to have consequences for a lot more. So I expect to see hospitalizations going up this year. And of course, the experts will be screaming about the triple-demic and all that, but I see it more as just a problem with those who have weakened their immune systems. And I'm not going to go into it in any more depth on that topic because YouTube would immediately delete this video. And so I'll just avoid the censors and move on. Some things that I see that are possible, or actually quite possible, in 2024, and if not this year, then at least very likely within the next few years, is that I especially think it's quite possible this year that we'll see a late summer or early fall return to some sort of pandemic that will require lockdowns and or that there'll be a lot of civil unrest because of it, and they'll impose curfews or that sort of thing. I see that as quite a likely thing leading up to November, and again, I'll leave it at that. It's very likely that, although it's not certain by any means, but it's very likely that we could see another housing market collapse this year. Housing prices have just been going up and up and up, and making it to where most people just can't afford to buy a house anymore. And I think we have that bubble going again that sooner or later the bottom's going to drop out, and suddenly there's going to be a lot of people that are underwater on their house payments, and we could see a real adjustment on values of houses, and whether that happens this year or within the next couple of years, I think it's inevitable it's going to happen. Another one that is quite possible, and if not this year, then sometime relatively soon, is just a major economic collapse, whether that's national or even global, because globally there's a lot of countries that are struggling right now, and certainly the U.S. is one of them, with the crazy economy that we have right now and with the massive national debt. It's just not sustainable. The stock market could take a dump at any time, or we could have multiple major bank failures, or the U.S. could default on the debt and cause just a major international monetary crisis. I'm no expert on any of that stuff, but I just see a lot of red flags there, and it drives me crazy when the so-called experts that are twiddling their thumbs in DC are saying, oh, we're headed for a soft landing, it's all going to work out, and yet it's just the whole system is disintegrating. And as I said, I think it's quite likely, at least within the next few years, that something major will give there. And it is quite possible that could happen this year, depending on other situations and events that happen. It could just snowball and turn into a huge nightmare. So anyway, don't mean to get too gloomy on that, but moving on, then I'll get even more gloomy. These are the real extreme things that are at least somewhat possible for this year. Do I think they will happen this year? Probably not. Most likely not. I certainly hope not. But at least these are things that I think are quite likely to happen sometime in my lifetime, assuming that I'm around for a while yet. One of them is a massive natural catastrophe, whether that's a mega earthquake or a super volcano or something. We actually have not had anything on a huge scale in quite a while. It's been quite a few years since the massive earthquake that hit Japan, or the 2004 one that hit in the Indian Ocean, I believe it was, yeah, that hit Indonesia and various other countries there. For instance, it's been way over the standard time gap for the Cascadia subduction zone to cut loose. And, occasionally you see articles from earthquake experts talking about the possibility of the big one, and people poo-poo that, but it's building up pressure, and sooner or later it is going to cut loose. Or we could see Yellowstone or some other super volcano suddenly come back to life. Those are kind of remote possibilities, but I think at this point that it probably is likely to happen sometime, at least within the next couple of decades. I could be way off base, and I hope I am, but something to keep in mind. Any of those things could happen this year. Probably won't. One that's probably a little more likely is another global war, or a country doing some massive first strike, trying to cripple another power. And I'm not even going to speculate about what countries would start that, but we're seeing more and more conflict around the world, and we have the fighting going on in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and we have rogue countries like North Korea and Iran that are constantly looking to develop nukes and start problems. So it is quite possible that sometime within the next few years, possibly this year, something could set that off, and things could escalate quickly and just have major warfare around the world. And then the final thing, to really go to a dark place, to finish this up, and you might not want to hear this, feel free to quit listening at any time, and I really hope that this does not happen and that I'm wrong about it, but this is something that I never would have considered even thinking about not too many years ago, but at this point I fully expect that sometime within my lifetime, and could happen as soon as this year, that we will see the end of the United States as we know it. How exactly that would play out, I don't know. There's all sorts of possibilities, whether we get hit with the EMP that knocks us back to the 18th century, or You know, whether we have massive civil war and the whole country crumbles, or it's such a major economic collapse that states just secede and start out on their own. I don't know. There's multiple possibilities, but as I said, I mean, that was something growing up and all through most of my adult life. I just always took for granted that the U.S. would always be here in the form that it is now. But given current events and the way this country is headed, I just think it's quite possible that at some point in the not too distant future that it's going to come to an end, and we'll have to see what that looks like and where we go from there. But, you know, it could happen this year if things get really ugly going into the election, or if one of those countries I mentioned decides to do a first strike or something. There is that possibility. So, yeah, the more I take a hard look at the way things are headed, the more I become what people would call a prepper. I don't mean to be doom and gloom, and I really hope that I'm wrong about those things. And, you know, I pray for the best, but prepare for the worst. So, yeah, to wrap it up, as you know, as I said with my thumbnail, I'm not optimistic about 2024. To summarize it, there's a line from a classic movie that says it pretty well. There's a storm coming in. This has been Republic Jim. I'll talk to you later.